This is episode 67 of the Fire Protection Podcast, powered by InspectPoint. Today, my guest again is Shawn Mahoney from NFPA on their technical team, technical services team. Shawn was great last time. Earlier this spring, we had him on talking about changes to NFPA 25. This episode is geared to what's coming in NFPA 72, the fire alarm codes and standard, or the standard. More focused on the 2022 edition changes there, as well as getting into some of the 2025, which is right around the corner. So Shawn is a wealth of knowledge in anything NFPA, but specifically 25 and 72, which are two powerful standards within our industry. So we kind of go through the top, I think there's 5 to 10, more like 7 to 10 different topics and the changes in 2022 and 2025. Dealing with batteries, cybersecurity, some stuff that's getting tossed into the annex for color coding and tagging. So again, great to have Shawn on to kind of update in a quick hour format to the industry and get some information out there to the fire industry. So hopefully you enjoy the podcast, and again, welcome Shawn Mahoney. Thanks for coming on again. We had a great reception of the last podcast we did on kind of updates to NFPA 25. So wanted to do this for NFPA 72 since there's been a lot of interest there and some of the potential changes. Before we get into that, we kind of talked about C&E and what were your overall thoughts of C&E, and I think we did the podcast to kind of help promote it, but any of your final thoughts from the conference in Orlando?
It feels like every year is better than the last, which is good. I mean, that's what we strive for. Like, we had a big attendance in the Expo between exhibitors and people there, and a lot of people in the educational sessions, which is it's always great to see, because I'm part of the group that we like go through the proposals for educational sessions and like choose them, and like being able to like see that, like, all right, we picked ones that people really like the rooms are packed, everyone's really interested in asking questions. That's really encouraging to see, and I've heard great comments about everything in the conference side. That being said, if you are interested, anybody listening, if you're interested in presenting at our conference and expo next year, which is going to be in Las Vegas, I highly recommend to submit a proposal before September. September 9th, I believe, is the deadline. If you just Google NFPA Conference and Expo 2025, there's a call for proposals in there. So I look forward to seeing what anyone can submit, because I'm always encouraging people. The more we have to choose from, the better, selection we can have for educational sessions.
Yeah, I saw there were some newer topics this year too. I think it's you guys always have the best topics. And there's a lot of them, right? It's a very wide range. For NFPA covers a wide range of fire and safety and security. So.
Yeah. It's the hard part of our job, is like our stakeholder group is so wide. So it's hard. It's like what you have to like try to get something for everybody. That's why we had 130 educational sessions. Like, it's just a lot.
Wow.
In order to get that breadth of information for people.
Wow, that's crazy. So, you sit on the tech committee at NFPA. Explain your role, obviously, and then your group's role and how that compares to everything else inside NFPA.
Yeah, so I'm in the technical services group at NFPA, and we sit in the engineering group. So we've got engineering, and in the engineering group, there's standards development, and then there's our group that sits next to them. So standards development, those are all the staff liaisons. They're responsible for running the technical committees that are the volunteers that actually create the standards, go through the standards development process. That whole group is responsible for that. We've got editorial in there, standards administration, all that stuff. We sit on the tech services side, so we serve as technical resources within NFPA, within the association. So if training wants to develop a new training, we're the resources that help. We're the technical SMEs that do that work. We do training, we do like blogs for communications. We do a lot of different like fact sheets, and we do a lot of the content that goes into NFPA Link, which is our digital platform for access to all of NFPA codes and standards. We provide the enhanced content, the direct navigation, all of that information comes from our group. We do create a lot of like outward facing things. You see us writing blogs, we create fact sheets, things like that. But if you are
Yep.
an NFPA member, if you ask a technical question, people always think that because I'm in tech services, I'm the person that answers that. If you ask a technical question, so if you're an NFPA member, you're allowed to ask questions on standards, codes and standards. If you submit it, it actually goes to the staff liaison responsible for that document, and they answer that question. So that's a service we offer. It's just not through our technical services group. So I do get that often because people are like, "Oh, you're in tech services, you must answer all those technical questions," and that's
Yeah.
not actually us. We're creating all the content and things that NFPA puts out.
Gotcha. Yeah. That's great clarification because, up until talking to you, this past spring, I didn't really understand it all. So that's great.
Yeah, it's a wide role, which I think we all really like. Everyone kind of picks different, topical areas. We have technical leads, like John Hart is the technical lead for fire protection systems and building life safety. So I kind of work under him, but I do more of the like fire protection system stuff. So like sprinkler, fire alarm, all that. But then we've got SMEs like Val Ziavras. She does a lot of the like building life safety. So like NFPA 101,
Sure.
life safety code, all that kind of stuff. We all have our own little niches, but we can all talk about all that different stuff as well.
What's your speaking of that? And I could throw this at the end too. But what's your? I always ask people, what's your favorite type of fire protection system?
I mean, I just like sprinkler systems and fire alarm systems. It's
Okay.
hard to say which one I like better. I do like the like electronics and programming and like all of that of fire alarm systems. So I would say that's probably my favorite. But I do like them like mechanicalness of a sprinkler system. Like in some way, the simplicity of it, I really like.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. Everybody, I kind of gravitate toward, I came up more in the sprinkler realm, but I kind of gravitate to some of the suppression ones, like chemical suppression, because it's just interesting. It's kind of like a combo of different things plus chemistry, right? I mean, I guess water is chemistry too, but
I mean, in my career path so far, I haven't really done a lot with like special suppression other than like
yeah.
water mist, which is like that between sprinkler systems and special suppression systems.
Right. Yeah. Water mist is that's really cool too. Um, all right, let's get into this. So at NFPA 72, we're on, I think 2025 is
2025 will most likely be put out in September, I believe. There's that
okay.
August standards council meeting, and they're most likely going to approve it for issuance in, usually it's like September-ish timeframe. You'll see that.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see most jurisdictions on 2016, 2019. 2022 is in there. So I kind of wanted to focus on, hey, what's different in 2022, and obviously mix in 25 since we're almost there.
Yeah.
But I would love to kind of go down your top, I don't know, 5 to 10, whatever it is of changes for 2022 and 2025.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, we can start with the big one that we saw a lot. I mean, we're still seeing a lot coming up, even in like 25, 13, 72 is like the idea of being able to remotely test or access things.
Yep.
So 72 added a whole section in chapter 23, which is on remote access. So whether you're doing remote access to complete testing and maintenance,
Yep.
or you're doing just remote access to look at what the control unit's saying, or if you're doing it for software updates, there's requirements that you need to follow when you're doing that. And the requirements are depending on what you're doing, but there's like 5 main requirements. The first one is you have to have a manual means to be able to shut off the remote connection between whatever computer you're using, whatever you're using to connect to that control
Gotcha.
unit. If the person who's remotely accessing that control unit goes inactive for an hour, it automatically shuts off that connection. So just to keep be able to going up to that computer and like do things to that control unit.
Interesting.
And then you can only work, like if you're doing any resetting or silencing or operating any emergency control functions, that area of the fire alarm system needs to be taken out of service. So you need to have a plan. You're basically impairing that part of the system to be able to work on it, which means you need to have a qualified person still on site to be able to do the resetting and the silencing of all those functions. So what usually this remote access is being used for is you'll have a manufacturer or a contractor where they have, their A-star programmer. They don't have to send the A-star or the A-team programmer to every single site to do work. They might, they'll send maybe their newer technicians or technicians that, don't know that specific thing. They can have a technician remotely access and help, someone on site do that work without having to drive that person to every site. That's what you're mostly seeing the remote access be used for. So you're always still going to have that qualified person on site to be able to do the work that needs to be done at the building.
Gotcha. So there's somebody physically still there, even if the whatever the lead technician or is diving into the panel, there still needs to be somebody there.
Yes, there still needs to be for all those cases. And then also if you're doing any software update, Chapter 14 still would have required you to do testing on all the changes to the software that you made anyway. So you still have to have someone there to do all that testing as well. So even if you're just doing, and then plus if you're doing like executive software update, you still have to have someone there to do all that testing for you.
Gotcha. Does NFPA 915 fit into that at all? Because remote testing and inspection.
I'm not sure. It's very possible. I haven't really dived too deep into the 915 stuff to know. I mean, I think mostly right now 915 is mostly around like allowing for inspections and things like that.
Yeah.
In those requirements to see where that lands. But I mean, I know 72 kind of covers a lot of that stuff for fire alarm.
Yeah, it already covers it internally anyway. I think 915 is mainly for it's a big a piece for the AHJ, but again it's a template for NFPA 72 and 25 if they're allowing it, which they've kind of got it.
Yeah, 25 amount. Yeah, 25 allows for remote testing. There's the requirement in there as long as you're completing the same tests remotely, you're allowed to do remote testing. But there is after a certain amount of time, you still have to go in person and do it. We're seeing that across all the standards, say fire pumps, everything is allowing you to do that remote testing.
Gotcha. Now, what is qualified, right? Does it specify in that remote access where is? So does it have to? Can it be a building owner, or does it have to be a qualified? Because I know qualified personnel is a term.
Yeah,
in a lot of NFPA standards.
Qualified in 72 and in most NFPA standards are basically they have the experience and knowledge or certification as per the authority having jurisdiction. So It's all to the authority having jurisdiction. They might say, hey, yeah, the building owner is good enough if you're doing something simple, but they're most likely probably going to say some level of certification or some licensure that the authority having jurisdiction provides.
Yep.
Yeah, same thing. It's the same thing with 25. That qualified. This codes and standards try to stay out of the qualification because it's all up to the authority having jurisdiction.
It's great. Yeah. It's all over the place. Yeah, I can imagine that.
Yeah,
that's a good one. What do you got next?
Let's see. Next one is going to be cybersecurity. So talking about remote access, everything being connected. Fire alarm systems are just as much at threat for a cyber attack as anything else that's connected to the internet. So in the 2022 edition, there was a new chapter added. So chapter 11 was added, which is just one section long, and it just says where required by other laws, codes, or standards, you need to incorporate some level of cybersecurity basically in your system. And then an Annex J was added with all of the requirements, cybersecurity provisions, standards, evidence of compliance, documentation for cybersecurity. But because it's in the annex, it's just a recommendation, right? So you see the word should be used. So these are all just things that should be done. If we're talking about 2025 edition, what happened was Annex J got moved up into Chapter 11, and now all of the shoulds have become shalls, and they're all requirements for cybersecurity to be provided. Again, still where required by other laws, codes, or governings.
Gotcha. Yeah, cybersecurity is I remember them talking about that and it being a whole topic at 72 and just other places too. And
Yeah, and
I
a
know
lot
it's
of it, a lot of it we're seeing is manufacturers need to have, need to get their products tested to some sort of standard on cybersecurity. You need to have some sort of protocol for making sure that things are secure. One
yeah,
protocol could be just not even connecting it to the internet, but that also could leave it more at threat because it doesn't have updates and things like that. So
yeah.
it's just like never ending snowball of how you figure out that cybersecurity. But a lot of it really does come down to manufacturers getting that testing done, those following the outside standards. There's some UL standards on that cybersecurity, and then providing that evidence of compliance for it, as well as that documentation.
Yeah, it's mainly on the software side, right? And it's cloud based, and there's a lot of security in the cloud. But it's got to be done, right? And I'm glad that's in there because
It's actually an interesting thing. I know we've been talking a lot about like advancements in technology, and like you see fire alarms, everything's going addressable and more connected. But you're also seeing this other space where like places that really want their sites to be secure are going more conventional with fire
yes,
alarm systems in order to make sure like that's their way of being the cyber secure is like we're not connecting to anything. It's purely conventional. We don't have to worry about those things, which is just an interesting way, things getting, I guess, less advanced but more robust.
so wait, not a conventional panel but
Yeah.
just not connect. Oh, so not an addressable panel. So it's not an addressable panel that's not connected to the internet, right? It's an actual conventional panel.
Yeah, so like a lot of places, not a lot of places, but I've heard of places they'll say we're just going to do a conventional panel. We're not connecting it to anything. It's going to be standalone because we don't want to have to worry about connecting it to anything and like how it could be attacked or connected to any of our other systems.
Gotcha. Interesting. Wow.
Which is an interesting thing I saw because I was at Protect a Wire a couple months ago through SFPE. I'm on the board there, and we had one of our meetings there, and they were showing us they're like we have a big demand for like they're building a lot of conventional panels because they have they sell some of their own labeled panels on the side. And they're like, yeah, we have a
Right.
huge demand for you know conventional equipment because of that technology of that cybersecurity. I said that's pretty interesting.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I could see that. I could definitely see that. Um, depending on what you're protecting, and majority of it's not going that way, but might be a growth. So, all right, cybersecurity. What do we got? What do we got next?
Well, the next like big topic that was changed in the 2022 edition is going to be batteries. So this is like a big thing in all codes and standards that we've been seeing, right? Like energy storage systems, lithium batteries, like anything battery related, we're trying to protect against. So the committee now requires that it was effective January 1st, 2024. So it wasn't effective at the time of the issuance of the standard, but now we're in 2024. All rechargeable batteries that are used for secondary power supply need to be listed by a nationally recognized testing laboratory. So you're going to need to
Wow.
use listed batteries in your control units because they want to make sure that the batteries that we're using are of good quality and they're not going to cause a risk to the control unit and actually able to provide that power.
Or just ignite, because you already have the. I'm in New York City right now, and they have so many issues with
Yep.
unlisted batteries and unlisted chargers and that whole thing, right? So it's kind of a combo. Obviously, you're providing secondary power, but also you want a listed battery in there, so it's not starting on fire.
Yeah, because a fire in your fire alarm cabinet is not going to be very
No,
good.
no. Yeah, that wouldn't look good. Um, Interestingly enough, I know batteries is a big, and then you got a few more topics, like kind of subtopics there. But when we did some analysis a year or so ago, out of we kind of took a look at all fire alarm inspections in the Inspect Point platform, and um, battery deficiencies were now it was a wide range of deficiencies inside of battery, right? Could be the date, could be, just say it could be a non-critical, it could be a critical, obviously a replacement, but that was, I think, 12% of batteries there was an issue with, and they probably fixed it immediately, right? But it was just interesting. That was number one.
Yeah. And it's interesting because like you rely on that. Because in the case of a fire, one of the big things that they're going to do is shut power off to a building. So you want to
Yeah,
make sure you've
yeah,
got that backup power.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And interesting enough, like to the 2025 edition, there was some more changes about batteries in chapter 14, talking about inspection of batteries. You're no longer just looking at the date of manufacture of the batteries, mostly because a lot of times that's not actually provided. But you're now, when you look at that battery, you need to make sure every year that there's at least that the batteries at least have 60% of the shelf life remaining of the battery based on that used by best by date on the battery, which is interesting now because now you're looking at the manufacturer to say, okay, when do you say that this battery is good till? And then you're
Right.
using that date to confirm that the battery is still going to be in that use by, the best use by shelf life for the next year of the battery.
Yeah, that's interesting. What are manufacturers of the batteries saying? Usually, a shelf life is. Do you
I
know?
don't know off the top of my head, but I mean, you're looking at maybe like 6 years, 5 years, something like that.
Okay, okay. It's not
Yeah,
like one or two
it's
or
nothing,
okay.
it's not like it's changing how we're using batteries, right? It's
Sure.
most people were just putting the install date on it anyways, right? Not even looking at the date.
Yeah,
Sure.
exactly.
Because a lot of cases it might not be on the battery, right? The manufacturer is going to print it and they're going to most likely put their best by date. So you can now just use the best by date instead of trying to figure out when was this thing manufactured to use that.
Right. That's interesting data, and I think we're the industry and people that are using digital platforms. There's for the top deficiencies, you want a little bit more data on it, right? Hey, if you can warn your customer that you know 3 months ahead of time that this work is done, instead of like showing up and then writing it up, if you can give them analysis, hey, this is coming due, we need to replace this. So I think there's some really great data points you can get with that, and dates are one of them, right? Whether it's batteries on fire alarm panels, whether it's sprinkler head testing, whether it's fire extinguisher hydro dates, right? There's a
Yeah,
lot of analytics you can do if you're gathering it correctly.
that is true. Yeah, it's all comes down to gathering it, using it in a usable way to be able to inform the codes and standards. Like we talked about this last time we talked about 25 is we're seeing the change in some of these frequencies because now we're starting to get data in on things, right? We saw the change in
Yeah.
the dry sprinkler testing and the quick response sprinklers. Like, the more data we can get, the better we can refine those frequencies. There still is an allowance in 72 and in 25 for you to use your own frequencies, but you need to back it up with data. So I do know, there are some sites or there are some companies that have a lot of buildings and they start to collect their own data and say like,
Yeah.
based on these failure rates, or we're going to push out inspections this much. Obviously it has to get approved by the authority having jurisdiction, but you are allowed to change those based on, the data that you collect and analyze, and it gets approved.
Yeah, it's all at the end of the day, it's who is approving the HJ. That a lot of times that goes back to the insurer as well, and they're just going to point to
True.
the
Yeah.
standard a lot of times. But if you're self-insured or you're your own entity, obviously you can back it up with whatever you got.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, I
Cool.
mean, along the same lines as talking about batteries and listed batteries was a change in the correction factor. So when you design a fire alarm system, you've got to have that required battery backup, whether it's, 15 minutes in stand or 15 minutes in alarm, 24 in standby, or 5 minutes in alarm, 24 standby. And then you have to put that correction factor. Prior to 2022, it was a 20% correction factor. Now you have to increase your battery up 25%. And that's just a better understanding how batteries work, how the aging of the batteries are. We want that little bit more of safety factor to allow for those aging batteries. Also knowing that potentially it's a higher deficiency area that we want to have a little bit more capacity in there when we're doing our calculations.
So that calculation or that formula is going to go from 20 to 25% in the 2025 code.
In the 2022 code, it's already there.
2022. Okay, it's already there. Okay, so might as well just do it now, right? But I know there's different platforms that'll kind of calc that for you. So
yeah, or the manufacturer will do it on their spec sheet, things like that. But pay attention to it because they might still be using that 20% safety factor. They might not have increased it up to that 25. So.
Interesting. Yeah, good point. I like it.
Yeah.
All right, what do we got? Let's see. Software access? Is that one of them?
Yeah. So software, this one comes up a lot that I hear about, and I've seen like people posting on like the fire alarm groups and stuff. Like is there anything that requires us to be able to have access to our fire alarm unit, or is it just the installing contractor gets to keep that software and like only they can maintain it? The answer is no. And like 72's always kind of been stating that, but now there is a section in there. It says for all software that connects to and is part of the building life safety network components, the software security access or any means to obtain that access needs to be provided to the owner or the designated representative. Meaning that like you can't hold the passwords hostage and say like only I'm maintaining the system. The owner has all of the access to that unit and they can have anybody work on it that they want.
Interesting. So wait, if there's a XXX brand panel there, right? The owner owns that fire alarm panel, right? So through the install, so they'll have the passcode to get in. So if a distributor says or contractor comes in, say I'm the only one allowed to work on this. So with this kind of new part of the code, since they have access to that panel, anybody could come in and work on it?
Yeah, I mean, as long as they're qualified to do the work, the owners. Okay. So basically what this is saying is that the installing contractor, anybody who's been working on it, can't hold those passwords and access from the owner, right? So say the owner wants a different contractor and then new contractor says, I need the software access, that the old contractor has to provide it or the owner has to already have had it.
Gotcha. That is a big step. That's brand new.
Yeah, so that's a new section in the 2022 edition.
Wow, that's a big. I mean, it's a great movement toward a more open platform, open industry within fire alarm, because traditionally, and I know who fought this, right? And we all know who fought it, but traditionally, it's like, hey, it's very proprietary in nature, and owners and facility managers are not happy with that, right?
Yeah,
it's not. The sprinkler is very open. I think some of the suppression side is pretty open as well, but fire alarm seemed to be pretty proprietary, and I guess now with that, it kind of opens it up right there. I mean, through the owner, right?
Yeah, I mean the thing is, you still have to get a qualified person, which means that the AHJ might still require that new person be trained by the manufacturer, right? They still might have to have their training to work on it. So,
right,
it might be some holdback on there, but this is stating that like they can't hold the access from the owner.
Yeah. That's a great step, and a big step in the industry.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool.
Next one I have here is talking about like abandoning equipment. So if you're updating a system, maybe you're moving some equipment or you're not using a circuit or anything anymore, you're required to remove any abandoned equipment, or you have to mark the equipment that it's no longer in service. So like I've seen hotels that have like 3 horn strobes in it, right? And it's obvious that they just like updated, but you're like, well, which one goes off, right? Or like you're in a room and like one's going off. You're like, oh wait, do I actually go out? What's about the other 2, right? So those other 2 would need to be marked like not in service, or they have to be removed.
Yep.
So that's just that buildup of equipment.
We grab it. We select it as inactive. You can inactivate piece of equipment, right? Mm-hmm. So it's still there, but it's inactive. So
yeah, the thing is though, it has to be marked on it. So this goes
physically on the device.
Yeah.
Okay.
So like that's a big thing with a lot of codes and standards. Like NFPA 101 says if anything is obvious to the public that it's a life safety feature, it has to be maintained, right? So
Right.
this goes along that lines. Like if you have a horn strobe there, like it's either going to be maintained and it's going to work, or the general public has to know that it's not working, or you just need to remove it.
Makes sense.
So
Gotcha.
that's just going along that lines. It just I just imagine, like I remember seeing the pictures where there's like a bunch of horn strobes. Like I think we've all been in hotels like that, right?
Right. What one to use or one's going
Yeah.
off.
Which one's the one to trust, right? So
Yeah.
now it's required to either market. I think in a lot of cases people are probably just gonna pull it down, put like a junction box cover on it, and like call it a
Yeah.
day.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
And then the next big one that that has happened in like chapter 14 on the ITM side is the addition of the definition of an observation. So an observation is a suggested correction, improvement, or enhancement to the fire alarm system that's not considered an impairment or a deficiency. So that's the definition. And then there's a section in there that says if any observations are noted, they are permitted to be communicated to the system owner, but the system owner is not required to address them until they become an impairment or a deficiency. So some
Okay.
might say, that is not a huge change, but I think it's a big change for the inspector, right? Like if you see an issue, because there's a lot of stuff that's not covered in an inspection, where it's like, oh, the smoke detectors, you don't have full coverage anymore because you added a partition, or your notification appliance isn't in the right spot. That's not necessarily a deficiency, right? Because we're assuming the system was installed and accepted, but it's
Yep.
something that you want to note to the owner. But sometimes you don't want to note it because you don't want it to look like a deficiency that the owner has to fix, but you're just trying to provide them information. Now you have that ability to give them an observation without that worry that all of a sudden the owner thinks it's something they have to do. It's just kind of like giving you that
Right.
ability to note those things.
Yeah. We call it a recommendation, and we use it in different sections of the platform, but it's needed because you install it for the standard, but in 72 and 25 and others, it's not sometimes covered. So you want obviously to alert the owner, but you also want to cover your ass, right? Make sure,
Yeah.
because if there is something wrong, if something comes down to litigation, there's an issue, right? You want to document that. And there's always a fine line of that too, of like how far do you go, right? And um the inspection criteria is X, and then the installation criteria is a different standard, but how deep do you go? So take some photos, throw some recommendations in there, and I like how they defined it as observation. I like that term better, and if they put that definition in there, it's that hopefully that kind of works its way through different standards in NFPA as well.
Yeah. I think we were talking about like 25 is the same thing where it's like, well, if I see something that's not, it's a design issue, and I think it's like the owner should at least be aware of it. Like, how do I note it that,
Yeah.
it's not getting noted as a deficiency, but the owner's still knowing. And now I don't want to be responsible for not saying it, or like saying the wrong thing or something. Like now it's defined as that observation. It's just there, just as a note. And now it's kind of allowing that stream of information. So,
Yeah, it's great. I think ULC has it up in Canada already. It's already in their kind of I believe it's in the later codes that they have. So again, it's a great way to document.
yeah. And then like the other addition that's happened in the 2022 edition is just adding an annex. Still staying on that like ITM side, it's an annex for like a tagging program for a fire alarm system. Again, it's annex, it's not required, it's just a suggested tagging. And I think we were talking, Drew, you said that there's a lot of jurisdictions that kind of already do this, but I think it's
Yep.
just added as a way to do it. It's similar to what we see in 25, where you have a tag goes on the control unit when you install the system stating who designed it, who installed it. Then you have a service tag stating like when was it last serviced, were there any deficiencies, who's the contractor. You have a yellow tag that goes on it if there are any deficiencies, And then you have a red tag that goes on it if there's any impairments. So it's a good way to be able to
Yep.
track, what's going on with that system, like right away with a tag on that control unit.
Yeah, and it's a nice suggestion. I know 25's got it, and I think Texas, the state of Texas has it. I believe the state of Florida has it. There's parts of New York State that have it as well, but every AHJ is a little bit different, right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, but hey, what NFPA is doing is they're putting a standard out there. It's not in the code, but it's a recommend. It's in the annex. So now beyond the physical tagging, we're starting to see that within the digital space as well, right? So you can tag a system, whatever color code you want. That goes to the AHJ. That'll then roll into like compliance engine, right? So it'll digitally go up to the AHJ now. So it's kind of, on top of like the actual color code tagging, there's actually digital tagging, which obviously that data is going to flow faster up to the AHJ and the owner.
And it helps them sort it easier, right? Instead of like,
oh yeah, tremendously.
Like, all right, we've
yeah,
got
I'm gonna look at all my red tags.
Yeah. That's I mean, those are the big ones that I had. Obviously I could go on for days, like changes in 72, but those are the big ones that I had. As far as the 2022 edition, I can go over real quick. Just like one or two of the big ones that we're seeing in the 2025 edition, if you want to talk about those real quick.
Yeah. Let's hit them quick.
Yeah. So one that actually just, if anybody was at CNE, we have our technical session that happens on Thursday, in which the entire membership who's present gets to vote on certified amending motions, which is basically after the second draft goes through, you're still able to put in a NITMAM, which is a notice of intent to make a motion. If it gets accepted, you get to make a motion in front of the whole membership, argue that you want your change to be able to either to happen or not to happen. So this one happened in the second draft of 72. They added in, based on a Fire Protection Research Foundation report, a maximum ceiling height for smoke detectors using the methods that are provided in Chapter 17. So they added in that detectors, you're allowed to use those methods up to 40 feet in height. After 40 feet in height, you need to have some performance-based method for placing those detectors. There was a CAM on that to remove it, but it actually CAM failed. So we're still at, now you can still use, there's basically, it was ambiguous before now, but now we're going to have that 40-foot mark where it says, I can use the spacing requirements in Chapter 17 up to 40 feet. After 40 feet, then I have to start looking at what that ceiling height's going to do to my detector placement, which is, a good movement, getting rid of some ambiguity. So we see that change happening. Maybe not a huge deal for a lot of people, but, adding that requirement in there is a good one.
That's great. And it's funny enough, I'm going to back up here. So I'm in Midtown Manhattan today. And I worked on the project at Moynihan Station, the new Penn Station. It was back in, we had it's kind of some crazy systems there, but I know that the fire alarm, they had to go performance based because obviously traditional detectors wouldn't work in this huge atrium, and it was about 40 feet. So I think they went UVIR. Anyway, they got a performance based, did a whole study for it. But it's very interesting you bring that up, because I'm looking down on it right now. But obviously they were ahead of, and now it's in the code for 25. So it's interesting.
Yeah. It also brings up, I've had discussions with people about it now, like now that it's there, like you probably don't want to be putting a detector 40 feet in the air, because you still have to go look, you would still have to test it.
Yeah.
So in a lot of cases, you're still going to be using like a beam detector or something in those large spaces, but there's still, I mean, you still have to look at the spacing requirements for a beam detector. So now, I mean, that's all there. I do want to note that if you did want to go look at that Research Foundation project, there was some recommendations for, reducing spacing as you get higher. That didn't make it into 72. I wouldn't be surprised if you see an adjustment for the next edition to start providing a little bit more requirements for those higher ceilings based on the Fire Protection Research Foundation report.
That's interesting. Yeah, I know. I'm sure a lot of architects and FPPs, FPEs need to know that. So, where do they do that testing?
I'm pretty sure it was all modeling.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And it was like after X amount, I don't know off the top of my head, it was like after X 10 feet, you like reduce it as the height goes higher. That didn't make it into the standard. But I wouldn't be surprised if you see that making its way into the 20, what is it, 8 edition.
Yep.
Adding it in there. But that was the contentious. That's why there was a cam on it. It's because like, hey, there was still some other stuff. But again, that's how the membership voted, and the tech committee, everyone felt that 40 feet was a good switchover spot.
No, that's great. I'll have to look at, I'm heading into the train station in a few minutes here, so I'm gonna be looking up and see what they got up, if I can even see them.
You said, but weren't you said they were using video detection?
They're using video detection. It's wild. So I was working on the sprinkler stuff, and it's this huge glass atrium, right? So it's not a flat ceiling. It's tough to collect the heat or smoke or whatever up there, right? So I think that's why they went UVIR. But weirdly enough, I work they're deluge systems. So they're actually deluge systems with Viking VK630. So traditionally enlisted, they throw like 26 feet, but they needed them to throw 36 feet, right? In order to cover all of like the Moynihan Penn Station area, right? To get the coverages on the floor because of the way that everything's designed. So literally there's these deluge systems that are, I think it's cross zone detection on UVIR, and then it might be a manual thing by the FDNY. So literally the entire Moynihan Station floor, if there's a fire, they'll set off all the deluge systems.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
It was really cool to work on. Again, I don't know how it turned out in the end because I was just mainly in the design phase, but I know they have open head deluge systems because I saw them last time I was there.
Wow, that's cool. That's the first time I've really heard of like a deluge system used like indoors like that. So
Yeah. I mean, and they're remote resetting, so if there is a whatever false activation or whatever, the FDNY can key it in to shut off those deluge systems.
Nice, that's cool.
Yeah. Anyway,
I bet there's some level of pre-signal and all that stuff before those things activate. Right?
Yeah, it's all performance based, and it's again it had to get special approval with Port Authority, FDNY. There was multiple FPE firms involved with this as well.
Yeah.
So pretty cool stuff. Well, Shawn, thanks again for coming on, and this is awesome. Yeah, I think we you and I mentioned maybe getting together in the fall up at NFPA headquarters or something.
Yeah. Definitely. I definitely I like being able to talk about all this stuff. So it's nice to, people interested in hearing it. The other thing I wanted to add too is like if you're listening and you're really interested in like the changes to a code or standard, I highly recommend checking out NFPA link, because if it's only for this one feature, right? If you're in NFPA link, you go to NFPA. First of all, it gives you access to all of NFPA codes and standards right from the get-go. If you go to 2022 edition to 72, you can look at all the changes that I just talked about. It'll show you all in line, like what the change indicators look like, whether the section's new or changed or all that. You can actually click on the change and it'll show you the past text right next to it. So you can see exactly what it used to look like. And in most cases, we load like a summary, which talks about like what the change actually was and gives you a little bit more detail. So even if it's for one thing, right, just being able to see those changes in line is huge. But again, then we have enhanced content that gets added for all that stuff and so many more other features that NFPA link provides. But I was on like paternity leave 2 years ago with my son, and that's when they added that feature. And I came back and I was like, this is awesome. Like,
that's great.
Just being able to see side by side is crazy. And then let alone being able to, like, for us to be able to go in and add like, hey, this changed because of this, provide more detail or like how this might affect you. I think it's really important for people who are using the codes and standards to have.
Yeah, NFPA link's been a home run for my team. and and the industry in general, right? I think it was well needed, and again, it's going to keep progressing. And I think it's a Kyle and the team over there are doing a great job with it. And
Yeah.
I probably should get him on at some point too to talk about it.
Yeah.
Maybe
he'd
he
be
can
down.
join us in October.
Yeah, that'd be cool. I mean, it's interesting too, like to get Kyle talking about like the technical side on the software, right? Which
Yeah.
is also very different from like technical side from us, like people who put in the information. He gets to talk about like this is what the platform can do, and then we can say like yeah, this is what we get to do with it now. Like this is the kind of information I put in, or like even just direct navigation, like them giving us the ability to make an entire situation, right? Like if you go into NFPA link, you could click on a hospital corridor, right? And it'll show you a picture of hospital corridor, and you can click on different parts of it, like maybe the horizontal exit, and it'll provide you the requirements. It'll provide you the links to the sections with those requirements for that exit. So it's really interesting, like all the stuff we get to do with like building those situations and figuring out what we want to put in those, which is really fun. We did a whole educational session at CNE kind of on that, talking about code and standard requirements, walking through a hospital, going through all those situations that we built, which was fun.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know you guys did that. But moving from that kind of manual static version, right, to the more interactive
Yeah, there's
within
tons of
Link
stuff. Tons of stuff
is
we get
huge.
to do, and
Yeah.
things are constantly upgrading, which is exciting on our end.
Well, cool. Well, thanks again, Shawn. This is awesome.
Yeah, thanks for having
I'll
me.
get this out in the next couple weeks. Where can everybody find you? NFPA.org, right?
Yeah, NFPA.org for NFPA stuff. If you're interested in NFPA link, NFPA.org/link. Probably the best way to find me is like LinkedIn. Shoot me a message on LinkedIn if you've got any questions, or Mahoney at NFPA.org. If you've got any questions, even if you got a question, you're like, I got a question, someone at NFPA can answer. I just don't know who. Like, shoot it my way. I can always direct it in the right way. I always tell people that, like, just send me a message and be like, you're probably not the right person, but I always, send them in the right direction. So SMAHONEY at NFPA.org. Feel free to send me an email with any of that stuff as well.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, man. We'll talk soon.
All right.
Enjoy
Thanks,
the summer.
Yeah, you too.
This has been episode 67 of the Fire Protection Podcast, powered by InspectPoint. I want to thank Shawn Mahoney again for coming on. Again, and hopefully, as we alluded to it, might be able to do this in person up in NFPA headquarters in Boston in the fall. Yeah, thanks for him coming on and NFPA supporting us and getting some information out to the industry. So, see you again soon. Thanks.